BRI Limited in various management capacities. Mr. Kumolu is the co-convener of the West Africa Agribusiness Show. Mr. Kumolu, it's nice to have you with us today, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ope, for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Next is Dr. Dibakundi. Dr. Dibakundi is the Executive Advisor to the Governor of Oyo State on Agribusiness. He's also the Director General of Oyo State Agribusiness Development Agency. He's a senior scientist with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, with close to 2 decades of international development management experience. He leads IITA agribusiness management globally, with specific focus on private sector engagement and development of agricultural enterprises in scaling agricultural innovations. He has piloted several agribusiness development projects with verifiable success with both domestic and international organizations of high repute. He has a vast amount of knowledge on agribusiness. You can say he's an agribusiness enthusiast. Dr. Akonde, we know it took you a lot to be with us here today. We deeply appreciate you, sir. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Ubong Inyang. He's the head of partnership and corporate communications with Babangona, where he leads the development of strategic relationships and is responsible for ideating, designing, and leading execution of innovative and large-scale strategic projects designed to drive market deepening and expansion of Babangona's work with smallholder farmers. They are doing a great job at Babangona. Thank you, Mr. Inyang, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here as well.
Dr. Manzo Maigari is next. He's an agribusiness expert with vast experience in the public and private sector. He served in the private sector until 2015, when he was appointed and reappointed the Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry in Kaduna State between 2015 and 2019. He became the Director General of the Nigeria Agribusiness Group in October 2019. He has served and still serves on various national agribusiness boards and committees. Thank you, Dr. Magari, for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you very much. To all our participants, thank you once again for joining us. Of course, you will all agree with me that agribusiness is the mainstay of our economic development. And we at the West Africa Agribusiness Show, we are poised to give a platform to all agribusiness stakeholders to come together and develop ideas that, of course, will grow the agribusiness sector across the region ultimately. Thank you once again for joining us. And of course, I wish us all a fruitful session. Kindly note that we are live on YouTube at the moment. Our YouTube channel is WAASHOW Exhibition, WASHO Exhibition. Kindly join us, please, and follow us on social media platforms. I'll be handing over to Mr. Kumolu now for the session. Thank you very much for joining us once again. Mr. Kumolu, please.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone, our panelists, and also our participants for making out time to follow us and attend to this topic. Like you rightly said, most of the guys on the board, on the panelists today, I have one-on-one with. I was with Dr. Manzo at the WAS exposition in February, and we had a lot of conversation around the development of agribusiness in Nigeria, and I'm 100% sure that a lot of our people will benefit from his wealth of experience this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're following us from. Because we have a lot to cover, I don't want to bore you with a lot of talks. I want to just go straight to the point, and let's have our panelists respond to some of the questions that I have prepared for them. We all know that before the oil boom in Nigeria in the 70s, agriculture used to be at the forefront, where Nigeria used to be at the forefront of production of palm kernel, palm oil, granite, and the rest of it. But at the advent of the oil boom, we started shoving agriculture to a side, and agriculture, as at that time, accounted for 60% of our GDP and 70% of our export. But we've lost track. But I am happy now with the intervention from both federal level and the state level regarding regarding aggressive focus on agricultural development, small and small scale enterprise, and PPP across all range of agriculture. So to my first question, I want our participant to have the privilege of knowing that knowing the advantages of PPP in agribusiness. And my first question is, let's enumerate the types of agribusiness that we have in Nigeria and the importance of this agribusiness in enhancing food production and economic development. My first question, I would like Dr. Manzo Magari to respond to my first question. Hello? Yeah, doctor, are you there?
I'm here. So I thought your question was more of a statement, but you can now ask it so that I get the real context.
Oh no, I said I want us to enumerate on the fact of PPPs in agribusiness. So I want our followers to understand the types of PPP that exist in agribusiness in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, good afternoon, everybody. PPPs are a kind of a global arrangement with universal applications. And obviously, they can take all kinds of shapes and forms. In agribusiness, nothing is different. A PPP is always a PPP because it involves the government, which is the public sector, and a private sector entity. Now, coming back to the types that readily come to mind, we have concessions. And depending on how you want to structure that concession, you can concession a facility or a project, a government project to a private entity for a period of time with clearly set deliverables and timelines, such that the private entity comes in, invests to improve on that facility, that public facility, and you are able to achieve goals that ordinarily government will not be able to achieve. You have situations where an outright partnership can be entered into, where government will contribute to an SPV, that's a special purpose vehicle. In most instances, government always contributes land, either land or maybe structures or an equipment or whatever, a kind of a facility as their own contribution to that SPV, and then the private sector upgrades it. To give an example, I'm going to talk about the Veterinary Research Institute in Onfarm, which normally should be producing all livestock vaccines that are used in this country. But unfortunately, because of course we know how government public facilities have been managed, they are unable to do anything, and therefore we've resorted to importing all livestock vaccines into the country. Now there's an effort to bring in a private sector player into that arrangement, so that the facility can be upgraded into a modern livestock vaccine production point. We have all the expertise, the manpower, and all that is required, but unfortunately, we do not have a modern facility equipment in things like freeze dryers and the rest of them. Consequently, you can actually culture the vaccines and do all the passages, but you not do commercial production. So somebody's equipment, and then he will offtake the vaccines and commercialize them and sell. In return, he gives government something, a stipulated amount that is agreed upon. Therefore, this is the shape and form in which naturally PPPs will take place with the government.
Are you? Hello, doctor, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you for doing justice. I would like Dr. Dibakundi to comment on this.
Thank you very much. Even though I didn't hear Dr. Manso very well, but I think what has been said will probably fall around the areas of the kind of the public-private arrangement that exists within the agribusiness. I think the agribusiness PPP fall within the framework of the general PPP that exists regardless. I think one of the major differences that will map out the agribusiness around the PPP framework will be its value chain. And in agribusiness, there are diverse kind of value chains that exist, from production up onto markets. And these value chains determine the kind of arrangement, that exists, within that particular area. For example, while within the production cycle, which is in most cases, the first layer around that value chain, the kind of a public-private sector engagement that is currently inexistent will have to do more on issues like contract farming, outgrower scheme, and of late some new innovations that require the private sector to work with group of smallholder farmers in a different kind of an arrangement, more like a kind of in that particular area. But you will find a different kind of an engagement when you move further from the downstream, to the midstream and the upstream of agri, that will probably require more of diverse middle or small enterprise engagement, with farmers and then with the public sector. For example, you might be seeing a private sector or looking at a public sector strengthening more of infrastructure around the areas where they are working, and they can then look at the possibility of the public sector having more like kind of equity or shareholding within the business that exists within those cycles, around that particular area. Something like joint venture as well has always also been seen. I know that innovation within the scientific world these days are engaging more on joint ventures with private sectors and the public sector to pull out innovations to the public. So what I'm saying in essence is that the kind of arrangement in terms of PPP that we can probably identify will be strongly determined as to of which area we are making reference to. Are we talking about the downstream, the midstream, or the upstream? Are we referring to the production? Are we referring to the processing? Are we referring to the aggregation level? Are we talking about the marketing? Are we talking about the agro-logistics and many other areas as well? But of course, it all falls within the frame of the general PPP as it has been in existence. Having said that, I think I need to mention that there are emerging areas or emerging issues around this particular area that we mentioned. And I think as the discussion progresses, I might be able to throw more light into this area. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dr. Dibo. Thank you for that wonderful contribution. But Dr. Manzo, please, could you please move close to your microphone? I think we have problem hearing you. Maybe we should now listen to Mr. Ahobong. Let's listen to your contribution on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akin. So, like Dr. Manzo rightly mentioned, when you talk about public-private partnerships in agriculture, and Dr. Deba also made strong reference to the same thing. That's to say, it depends on what aspect of the value chain you are looking at, right? So it's pretty extensive when you want to start out looking at from from the production perspective? Are you talking about production? Are you talking about business development services around farm production? You could also be looking at provision of infrastructure in terms of on-farm and off-farm infrastructure. You could also be looking at agricultural extension services, agricultural marketing services, and other aspects. Interesting areas also, like Dr. Manzo mentioned, was in the area of research, right? And production of, in the example he gave, being production of vaccines, for livestock, and how government can work with private sector partners to achieve these different outcomes. So in terms of providing infrastructure for a research lab, or maybe providing like management contract services where there would be some level of technology transfer and knowledge transfer. For us at Babango now, our focus we play more in the production aspect of the value chain, right? And our work with government has really been around financial inclusion and providing access to capital for smallholder farmers. And so we do have mechanisms in place in terms of sharing risk between we as a private player and the government that provides the financing. And so I think in summary, the truth is in Nigeria, yes, there are existing models of public-private partnerships, but all of this play in very small buckets, often isolated in many circumstances. But yes, there is a need for us to have a more cohesive, strategic drive and mandate towards aggregating all of these resources to improve efficiency. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Obong. I would have loved us to dwell on partnership that has to do with the development of agri-value chain, because that's the area that we have. Like you said, agribusiness is an enormous field. You are looking from the downstream to the midstream to the upstream. And when you talk about the value chain area, where do you occupy? So when we are looking at all this, we can keep going without getting to any conclusive point. But all I want our participants to do is to gain from wherever point, from wherever part of the value chain that they stand, that they are playing. I want them to at least gain something. So for you now, I know you do with clusters of farmers in the north. So for me, what are your experiences with them? At least, what kind of PPP exists between you and some of the clusters that you have?
So, I mean, for us, it's really more of a service to the farmers, right? Besides, when you look at the role of financial institutions, and that's one area the government has stepped in over the years. As you're aware, I'm sure you're familiar with the ANCOS BOAG program, where the government provides guaranteed loans, more or less, through the commercial banks to players in the sector. There's ample room for other areas of partnership, particularly when you want to look at issues of like some off-farm activities like storage and processing. These are areas where with more government involvement, there would be significant impact in terms of efficiency and improvement of returns, even particularly for the smallholder farmers. So like with the farmers that we work with, within our constrained capital limits, right, we are able to provide them with storage facilities, for example, right? We provide them with storage for their harvest. Now, the risk involved in this is totally borne by us, but we provide this as a service only to the farmers that are within our own network, right? Interestingly, you'd still end up having a lot of farmers that don't have access to storage facilities, right? And what we can do, given our experience and our ability to scale, given the number of farmers we work with currently, I think this year we worked with over 40,000 farmers in 6 different states. Given our ability to scale, we can readily and easily aggregate more farmers into the network and come up with sustainable models where farmers do pay for the services for storage, and then the government also contributes, maybe by way of some form of equity capital or some guarantee to a lender for a particular project. And these infrastructural services can be integrated not only at the local level, being used by the farmers, but also at a national level, being used as strategic storage facilities for storage of grains, which is ultimately going to improve security. And so these are the kind of opportunities that exist in that space, but particularly when you want to talk about storage. And this is not only storage for grains, this also applies to cold storage facilities as well.
Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Dibakundi. I know you, with your role, back to Dr. Dibakundi, with your role as an administrator in Oyo State, and also as a front runner in the agribusiness sector at the state level, Doctor, I want to ask you: is the government fulfilling its role, its key role as an important player in the PPP aspect of agriculture in Nigeria? Let's take a case study of Oyo State, for instance. What are you doing to bring PPP to the forefront in Oyo State?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumolu. And I'm very delighted that you limit my response to Oyo State as a case study, rather than responding for the whole of Nigeria, because I've told you that there are diverse responses that will come for different layers of governance, whether the federal, state, or the local government. And even among the states, you have some that are very forward-looking with regards to agribusiness, that are not just paying lip services, but are also engaging practically in doing what should be done to support the public sector dimension into the PPP of agribusiness. So coming back to Oyo State, I think what I can tell us is that, well, for fact, that at the advent of this government in the state, the government chose to take agriculture and agribusiness as the core foundation to strengthen its own economy. The state has 4 major areas of core among all other areas of the development that we have. I mean, of course, we have physical, social, economical, environmental development patterns that exist. So for the economical aspect, the agriculture or the agribusiness aspect has been chosen as critical. And the 4 areas that we are focusing on as core are health, education, security, infrastructure, and then economy, and then agree to build it. Now, what that means is that we can't continue to do agribusiness or agriculture the way we are doing it in the state, or the way we were doing it in the States. So there's a difference between when agri is just one of those for you and when agriculture has become a core for your economy. So you have to look at the economic indices that exist and say that how does your plan feed into making this growth. So for example, we have to look at how agri will have to support the revenue, internally generated revenue. We have to look at how agribusiness or agri will support growth in employment. We also have to look at how that is going to support the growth of SMEs within the state in terms of trade as well. We look into all those, and then we look at where will all those come from. And by virtue of doing that, we found that out. We've done a need assessment around those areas. And what we've been able to do is that we realize that the actors currently within the ag space, in Oyo State, there's a need to a kind of a change towards those actors. We then categorize those actors as the micro, the small, the medium, and the large ones. And we call them our clients now. So while the small older farmers has been designated as a micro enterprise, in reality, micro enterprises are great. They do great things, but they rarely contribute directly to the economy. They rather do it indirectly. So meaning that those that we have as clients for this long are a set of people that might not be able to contribute directly to the economy of the state. So if we are building the economy of the state on the agribusiness, then we have to do something about those that should, the clients that should contribute directly to the economy, and those are the small and medium and the large enterprises. And because of that, His Excellency the Governor of the state put a bill across to the House of Assembly, which is your State Agribusiness Development Agency bill, and which has been approved, and that birthed the agency that is driving the agribusiness agenda within the state. I think, in my own opinion, and I may be wrong, of recent, that's probably the first of its kind in Nigeria. And what that agency is doing is to create a system in place to become a one-stop shop to support private sector investment in the area of agribusiness for the state, and also to engage in targeted and deliberate infrastructural development around where the private sector are going. And I won't get too much into the detail. But one of the programs of the 6 programs of the agency that you might find interesting, that is working around the PPP, is the one that we tag as the Oyo State Agribusiness Regional Development Program. And what that is doing is that has look at every region within the state and look at the comparative advantage, the infrastructure, the moribund infrastructures that we have, and has now started developing those moribund infrastructures. So, for example, I know many of us might probably have heard about farm estate. I know that acronym is becoming so popular now. I even see advert on TV people saying, oh, we have farm estate, we have land to sell and things like that. That is not the concept. I know I mean, in Nigeria, we easily borrow concepts and throw it all over the place. That's not what that concept means. What that concept meant and still mean is for us to develop contiguous land, and build infrastructures around the total value chain of agriculture of specific crops. For example, if we choose to do rice and we choose to do cassava and maize, then we have a contiguous land of close to around probably 5,000 or 6,000 hectares of land, which is going to be fenced, secured with all infrastructures that you have seen as the structural deficit for agribusiness to grow within the state. And when, as the state, we build that, then the private company will drive it. Individual private company. This is not given to just one company. And we are going through that stages of vetting, of reviewing proposals and business plans within the state, and they will manage their own businesses. However, what will happen is that as a state, we become a shareholder within that business and we sit as directors. So in one particular estate, you may have close to 20 companies operating, some doing production, other doing processing, other in agro-logistics, other producing the product and things like that. But what we will not do is to just produce maize and sell anymore. What we will not do is to just do cassava and just sell anymore. We want to ensure that whatever we produce within the state, we process this to products, that will match up with any products anywhere in the whole world. So that is what we are doing, and we expect to have like around 10 to 20 of these within the state as time goes on. We've started with 2 in 2 locations that are, and within just that, the governor is also ensuring that he built infrastructures around those farm estates. For example, the one around Agribusiness, that is where we have our rail line going to us. The dry port is built around that particular area as well. You probably have heard as well the expansion of the airport. Our local airport is not just being expanded to become an international one for expanding reason. We're expanding them expanding it actually to ensure that we have more of a cargo infrastructure built around that, based on the analysis we've done on what we can do within the state. And then, roads that are being built within the state also are targeted towards these particular areas. Probably you've heard about Monia is saying road that will link the Okeogun area where there is a high level of production of different crops to Ibadan where there is a concentration of the middle class. So most of the infrastructure that are being built now from the public sector perspective are being done, with the mindset of how it can strengthen the private sector development within that. That is in the area of infrastructure. And then now in terms of policy, that is why this agency that happens to be the DG has been established. And what we are doing is that private sector don't need to run around different ministries in Oyo State any longer. All what they need to do as far as agribusiness is concerned is to come to this agency and we become their servant. to do everything that they want once they are working with us. So all the ease of entry into business, the ease of doing business, we as an agency become the one-stop shop to do that with them. If they need to do something in the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of any ministry, our responsibility is to do it on their behalf. In addition to that as well, they are building what we call the agribusiness group within the state. We're already mapping all the possible agribusiness across those small, medium, and large enterprises and different value chains in the state, in different local government now. And soon we will have this mapped on the website where investors can see what we actually have, what we can produce, what we are producing, and I don't think, let me not dwell too much on this area, but just for you to have an understanding that investment resources are being pooled, by the public sector, not just resources, policy are being developed. You might probably have heard of Amateku. I think some people misconstrued what Amateku is also meant for. Amateku strongly is meant to strengthen the security system in the agrarian areas. Within the state, and that means that some of our farms will be well secured with the new security apparatus, that has been put in place by the government. That's some of the many things that have been done by the state that has come from the public sector angle, which their role one is to build infrastructure, their role is to develop the right kind of policy, and that's what we are doing for private sector to thrive. We don't believe that government has business in Oyo State. And we don't also believe that government should be engaging in business. Our role is to develop infrastructure that is well targeted, that is deliberately designed based on the system and strategy of the state, and also to create a policy for those private sector to thrive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Dibakundi. I know, Dr. Manzo, I know you did a lot of work when you were also in Kaduna State, and you also, as the DG of Agribusiness group in Nigeria, you've been doing a lot of underground work to promote agribusiness in Nigeria. Can you shed more light to what Dr. Dibakundi have said, based on what you've done in the past in Kaduna State and your experience now as the DG of the group nationally?
Okay, thank you very much. First and foremost,
Dr. Manzo. Dr. Manzo, are you there?
Hello.
Well, in the...
Hello?
Doctor, we are here. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I said, let me apologize. My video is off. I can't understand why. I'm trying to change laptops now, but let me finish speaking first. Okay. Obviously, the way to go is the value chain approach in agribusiness. And looking at what we are saying, and all the submissions that are being made now, obviously, for me, yes, these are more of interventions than a real PPP. For example, the failure of government to achieve so much is what resulted in the interventions that the central bank is doing in agriculture hugely. And of course, it is yielding. But even so, one will see that it has not been clearly defined along value chain development. And what I would really like to see Debo Akande do in Ogun State, in Oyo State, and to be probably modeled across Nigeria, is a situation where we, state governments, will define clearly the value chains that are competitive in their states, value chains that are that they are interested in, and then work to create local champions. And when I say local champions, I'm simply looking at players or people with prospects in those value chains, and then present them to central bank and say, look, we guarantee these guys, let them be funded. And then you bring clusters of small young farmers around them, let them produce for them to offtake, and then play in the value chain development. That way, if you do that for 2, 3 to 5 years, I can assure you those guys would have grown the position of being local champions. We understand the challenges that are in the agribusiness sector, and those challenges are quite humongous. They stem from access to land, to access to finance, to inability to qualify risk in agricultural ventures. And therefore, whether we like it or not, most players will not be able to play competitively in this space unless they are supported one way or the other by government. So if we do this, you might wake up one morning and find out that in Oyo State, you have 2, 3, 4, 5 big guys, small guys that have grown over the years to become key players in these commodities. And then, of course, that will solve a great deal of problems. But I think the major challenge we have with government is that civil servants and players in that space do not truly understand agribusiness, even though they arrogate that attribute to themselves, but they do not. Of course, and I believe Debo Akande would have seen that, having been in his short time in government. What we need to help government to do is to develop a structured way that is purposeful, pragmatic in developing agriculture. Now, the second thing I'm going to talk about is you asked what I did in Kaduna, how we were able to do things in Kaduna State. And I'm just going to say that when we got to Kaduna State, we scoped every sector, and we found out that, well, agriculture was employing about 70% of the population in the state. And you could see clearly that a lot of things had gone wrong. Even prior to that time, it was employing a higher percentage of people. Everybody is aware of the Kaduna textiles that relied on cotton. When the textiles died, over 50,000 people were thrown out of jobs. Imagine the multiplier effect. And so we made moves to look at value chains that are competitive. And then I'm going to start with tomatoes. The first thing we did was to start a tomato cluster, support the formation of a tomato cluster at Maigana, which used to be the headquarters of the Kaduna State Agricultural Development Agency. So we clustered farmers there, and we brought in Dangote Tomato as an off-taker of their tomatoes. And right now, even as DG Nigeria Agribusiness, we are actually we are working around the possibilities of establishing a tomato bank around that place, so that we can have a facility where people can come and store their tomato for 8 months, and then we release it into the market gradually and ensure that there is stability of supply, there is stability of pricing, and all that. These are things that are doable virtually in every form or in every commodity value chain. And the reason is simply because, like Debo said, or was it Mr. Ubong, storage, whether dry storage or cold storage, is a major challenge in Nigeria. And that's why you find out that we end up with about 50, sometimes 100% post-harvest loss. Having said that, we decided on other things. And what would we do? We work with USAID and the World Bank to come up with a regime of land certification. First, we zone the land for agricultural purposes, for the industrial purposes, and then for residential purposes. And then for agricultural purposes particularly, we came up with an arrangement where your land certification was not going to be more than 5,000 naira to have a C of O. The essence of that was to give that land value, put life into that asset, because land without value, land without certification is a dead asset. So that gave life into this, and farmers were encouraged. Now you could drop that certificate of occupancy in a bank or wherever and get funding. But that having been said, we also went a step further. We decided to budget for premium pay for agricultural insurance for all the smallholder farmers in Kaduna State. And that we paid for the 4 years I was there until I left. I cannot speak to concerning that now, but we made that provision because what I discovered was when I got to government in 2015 was that whenever there was flood, whenever there was drought, you see farmers writing and asking for government support that they lost their whole year's production to either drought or to flood. And I say, oh, come on, there's Nigeria Agricultural Insurance Corporation. What are they doing? Then we reach out to them and we had discussions, and that resulted in that. That also helped a lot because, like I said, agriculture in Nigeria, agribusiness, especially from the production end, is a very high risk venture. And because we depend on rain-fed agriculture, most of the time people lost most part of their production due to natural factors that they have that are beyond their control. States can do, these are things we did in Kaduna State, and states can also do this. The next thing we also did was that from the very onset, Kaduna State did not copy the model of the anchor borrowers program that the other states in Nigeria did. What we simply did was that we implemented a private anchor. What that simply means was that we brought in flour mills of Nigeria, the breweries, the Olams, and the rest of them, and we connected them to the farmers. Monies were paid directly to these companies. Of course, Kaduna State applied and said, okay, look, we want the money to be given to these companies, and the monies were given straight to the companies, and the government just served as a guarantee. That's why you find out that at the end of the day, farmers produce, and the production, the most successful period of agriculture in Kaduna State in the recent past was between 2016 and 2019. And I tell you, the indices which you use to know how much people have made money was, especially in most of the far north, is the number of people that go for pilgrimage. Kaduna State exhausted its quota for Hajj. And not just that, you find out that if prior to that period, most of the people that applied to go to Hajj were from the urban centers, but this time around, they were mostly from the rural areas. And so people made their money. The beautiful thing about it is that if you check the history up to this point, Kaduna State is #1, still remains #1 on the recovery on the anchor borrowers program. There is no state that comes close to Kaduna State in terms of recovery. But the whole idea was what? Was to create a business in farming. Most of the states that the government collected the money and gave out inputs, farmers took it for granted that that was their own democracy dividend or part of their national cake. And we must run away from this. If we want to develop agribusiness, we must create an enterprise in farming. Next thing we did was that we found out that virtually all our farmers were scattered and working in isolation of each other. They were all informal, not bankable, knew nothing about farming. So what we simply did was we decided to cluster them into cooperatives. And when we clustered them into cooperatives, what the immediate gain is that whatever they produce can be aggregated, and big buyers, that makes them visible to big buyers. Once they aggregate it and big buyers come, you have successfully eliminated middlemen. And therefore, a good chunk of the output of the outcome of their work, I mean, the cost of their produce gets directly to them, and the middleman is forced to go and work instead of sitting under the tree and waiting to rob farmers at the end of the season. Another thing that we did was we now brought about trainings, capacity building, to understand financial literacy, so that farmers are able to understand that, look, the farming that I am doing is a business, and I should be able to know that I put X kobo and got X kobo out. Then we brought about the issue of good agricultural practices, where we taught them and we build their capacity to understand standard practices. And the whole idea is what? To create a business in farming, you need to standardize the practices, because that's what will qualify the risk in that venture. And without risk qualification, you cannot attract insurance. And without insurance, no sane businessman will carry his money and put in a black hole. That's the reality. The reason why agribusiness in Nigeria does not attract funding is because the risk in agricultural ventures cannot be qualified. So all these are things that we did. And that's why I told you in the build-up, we also pay premium NAIC. In the course of doing what we were doing, I reached out to Royal Exchange Insurance, and I challenged them to go to East Africa and understudy index insurance. Now, I am glad to tell you that we have just signed an MOU with Royal Exchange Insurance, the very first private insurance company that is going to institute to implement index insurance for agriculture in Nigeria. Flour mills, they produce golden fertilizer. We had discussions around with them, and I told them it will be good such that they can include insurance in their fertilizer. And what that simply means is that for each bag of fertilizer, there will be a shortcut. When you use, the moment you buy the fertilizer and you use it, you send your details to a shortcut, and that activates insurance automatically. All this is aimed at creating several layers of insurance, so that at the end of the day, the ordinary farmer does not bear the brunt of all that is going to befall him as a result of factors that are beyond him. I can see that the moderator is trying to, I hope you don't want to stop me.
No, maybe. Yeah, because, Doctor, you see, the point was when I was coming for today's session, I prepared a lot of questions. And I knew we're not going to, if we have a whole day, we won't be able to finish this topic. I've had a lot of engagement with you. I know the stuff you're made of, but I know that if we have to cover, at least let's cover 1 or 2, 3 questions, so that we can also give our participant time to also ask and take few questions from that angle as well. So I really educative. I really appreciate what you have put together for today. It's really informative. But what brings us in common is the value chain area, the partnership that aim to develop the agricultural value chain. And that's why I quickly want to ask a few questions on that before we can give the participant time to also ask a few questions. So looking at the value chain, which most of you have also addressed, how do we develop specific value chain to provide access to domestic or export market? You know, that should be because of course you can produce locally. We can, even if we do all our production, I think we can always meet our demand locally. But for it to make a financial sense, we need to also start looking at value chain that target exports and the rest of it. So Dr. Mr. Ubang, I would like to ask you this question. From your experience with those clusters of farmers that you are working with in the north, do you think you have developed them enough to be able to target export markets?
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Aki. I mean, when we talk about local farmers producing into and their produce getting into export markets, right? We're no longer talking about. I think we're looking at integrating smallholder farmers into regional value chains, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me, like Dr. Manzo rightly mentioned, there are a lot of intricacies that are involved in getting that right. Okay, so let me before I get to the next level, which is exports, let's even look at what is obtainable locally, right? So a farmer produces grains and wants to sell his grains to, and hopes that a company like Nestle or Diageo or Nigerian breweries would buy his grains and use in their processing facility. Considering that these companies produce items that are consumed by people, there are standards that have to be met. There needs to be certain quality standards that are adhered to. If you look at the situation on ground with a lot of smallholder farmers, and Dr. Manzo referenced this, because Kaduna is one of the states that we've been working in since our inception. There's a lot of skill gap, knowledge gap there in terms of best agronomy practices, in terms of storage. And so all these things affect the output of the farmer, apart from yield or apart from other external factors like climate and all those things that will affect the farmer's produce. There's just some things that they don't do right. It could be the strain of the variety that they're producing. Maybe it's already lacking in nutrients, for example. So like, I know a lot of farmers up north prefer to produce white maize. And when you look at your FMCG companies, a lot of them that produce like your cereals, they prefer yellow maize because it's higher in certain nutrients. So there are those structural gaps. Now, you have to first address those structural gaps before you can talk about integrating them into these regional value chains. And this is one of the reasons why not only in Nigeria, but Africa as a whole, you see that there has been a serious decrease in the number of African exports when you talk about commodities that has been accepted in Europe. It's not because we're not producing enough, it's just because we're not producing up to standard. Another issue that you would have there is in terms of the quality of inputs that farmers have access to. Based on their own limited income and their own purchasing power, they most likely would prefer to buy herbicides and pesticides that are typically banned in other markets or have residues that many of these companies don't want to include in their production. All right. And so how do you tell a farmer to buy a particular chemical, maybe something like glyphosate that costs maybe like 1,000 naira, when maybe there are other options in the market that cost significantly more, but have lesser effect on the produce and on the environment? He probably can't afford those things because they come at 5x the price of what he's able to afford. And so by the time you begin to pick up all these little nuances, you see that there are a lot of gaps that affect the ability. And this is all even before we go into processing and infrastructure and, I mean, like off-farm related activities, right? Maybe like transport, storage, and all those things. We're not even getting to that point. So I think for us to successfully take our smallholder farmers, who constitute 90% of production in Nigeria, and get them to a point where we can integrate their activities into not only regional value chains, which is in terms of export, but even better positioning them within the local value chains, as it were, it starts with training. And Dr. Manzo mentioned that we need to train our farmers. There needs to be concerted efforts to train. We need the right kind of inputs. We need the right kind of inputs that would meet the quality standards that many end users would want in their products. Obviously, there's always the question of infrastructure that is necessary to preserve goods, to avoid post-harvest losses and things like that. And so at Babangona, one of the things we've tried to do over the years, and one of the things we still do every day, is to actively train our farmers, right? So even if you've been working as a farmer, even if you've been working with Babangona now for a period of 8 years, every year you're always going to go through what we call our farm university, where we try to upskill our farmers in terms of the best agricultural practices. We also try to ensure that they have access to the best quality inputs in the market, in terms of be it the fertilizer, the herbicides, the pesticides, and whatever. You always try to make sure that they also have access to the best quality, and provide them with the rights. We provide them with extension services, right? To test the products that are being produced, and also storage services to make sure that these items are stored in the right conditions. And over the years, we've been able to market many of the produce directly to end users, because over time, the quality in terms of what the farmers are doing has improved and increased over the years, and end users are able to take up this produce. So if we want to now move beyond local intake or local uptake and look at what is going on and talk about exports, you know, it still boils down to the same thing. You can't ignore some of these basic things, right? The farmers need to be trained. The farmers need to have access to the right inputs. We need to have infrastructure in place at community level and maybe at regional levels to allow for processing and packaging. These are important aspects of that value chain, particularly when you look at processing and packaging. And then in terms of infrastructure and how we build networks and business development around getting access to these international markets. These farmers are not going to be able to do these things by themselves. And so that there you have opportunities for private individuals, private companies to come in to that space and basically support and help these farmers gain access into this market. And the regulatory framework needs to be right for all these things to happen. You know, governments have to create policies and regulations that would support this sort of structures. And like Dr. Manzo said, we're not looking at interventions here, which is to say this comes in, you inject it today, you inject it tomorrow. But actually having done a thorough market assessment to say, okay, where are our strong points as a country, and not just maybe at the state level or at the regional level, but say, okay, as a country, where are our strong points? All right, okay, fine, we're great with maize production, even though we're not the most efficient, but we can produce a lot of maize. Okay, so how do we now then upscale our maize infrastructure to produce maize at quantities and at qualities that would be acceptable internationally? And then we now have a very concerted effort towards doing that. It's not just a question of just saying you do, you know, this little bit here, this little bit there, but really having a targeted focus and knowing, you know, the markets that you are expecting to see these outcomes at, and then putting in place mechanisms, identifying resources at every stage, inviting private sector players into the state, into the process, and making sure that the risks that you identify are properly allocated, and also that everyone who is coming to the table to participate is also given an opportunity to gain a commensurate remuneration for whatever value they are going to be bringing to the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing justice to that. But one of the things you said, there was an area where you talked about the extension service. That's a weak link. For me, I think it is the duty of the federal government or the state government to do extension services so that they can transfer technology from source to small-scale farmers. And in Nigeria, it's well known that we have only one extension service worker to about between 2,500 to 5,000 farmers. So how do you efficiently transfer technology to them to ensure that what they are turning out as output is quality that meets good agricultural practices for export? But you shed a lot of light, and at this point, I would like to take Dibakundi's comment on this. Dibakundi.
Thank you very much for having me again. I think I will start from the extension service that you mentioned, and I will brought over some other issues that are being raised as well. For me, I think extension services should go beyond the usual. In most of the advanced countries now, and even some of the developing countries, focus has shifted towards more of the agribusiness advisory services, where you engage people beyond just the technical knowledge that has been the bane of what even the most of our current extension services have. If we're talking about agribusiness, we know that we are not just talking about the technical aspect, we're talking about the business and the management dimension of it. Most of our current extension services do not have the skill sets around those topics, and we need to accept that that is where we are at this particular point in time. So meaning that skills have to be developed even around the extension services within the business and the management dimension of agriculture, beyond the technical aspect of providing information on good agronomical practices and things like that. If we are talking about agribusiness and we are now limiting ourselves to where we were. The second thing is that the use of technology in extension services is very, very crucial. There are e-extensions now that could make us to go beyond the space of 1 person to 1,000 farmers. E-extension could be deployed, and I'm making reference to e-extension that could be easily accessible by farmers generally. Most of us, I think the statistics shows that a high percentage of people, even in the rural area, use mobile phones. And we could deploy e-extension services via mobile phone, voice extension services, not necessarily just the written one, you know, that farmers could get that leads into reduce a lot if we engage in
Dr. Dibakundi, I think we are having a technical issue. Maybe the IT guys should try and resolve this. Or Mr. Dibakundi, can you hear us? Are you back on live? Okay. Dr. Dibakundi is having technical issue with the network. You can go on and keep Mr. Ubon. Maybe you can shed more light on the extension services that we talked about earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Akin. So I would just like to pick up from what Dr. Debo was saying, that when you look at providing, like in terms of government providing extension services, and then you find that a lot of people hired by the government for that purpose, particularly the ones that go out and field, there are quite a number of them that don't have the skills or the knowledge, as it were, that is required to transfer to the farmers. And it's also something Dr. Mando referenced when he was speaking, you know, about the absence of knowledge and skill gaps within a lot of public institutions that are meant to be providing the services. And I think this is an interesting area where, you know, a public-private partnership can thrive in the sense that you clearly outline and identify what you need to be done, all right, between the government and the private sector partner to say we need our farmers to hit XYZ matrix in terms of the level of knowledge or whatever the particular goal is at that particular point in time. And then you come up with a project plan or what have you to say, okay, by X number of years, we should have been able to cover X number of farmers, clearly identifying the outcomes that you want to see in terms of the level of knowledge transfer that has occurred.
Sorry, Mr. Obong. I appreciate your contribution, but Dr. Dibakundi is back. So maybe we can have him back online.
Thank you very much. I lost the connection for a few minutes. So I think for me, having said that about the extension services, it's also very essential to continue to have a bridge in between, a kind of an eye bridge, you know, where we continue to build the human while we deploy technology. For me, I also think that we've spoken about export, and I think export is very good, is important, but I will actually veer a bit from that. I think how we rather concentrate on much more on the $10 billion that we are using as a country in importing food. And I would say that how can Nigeria as a country or each state focus on import substitution? What can we do to ensure that we take a good percentage of this food that we are importing, and that we reduce that importation, and each state leverage on their area of comparative advantage to do that. How can we engage more beyond the production that we have laid a lot of emphasis on, but on processing, to ensure that we process, we package product to the standard that will compete with whatever we are importing, for example, on rice, for example, on chili, on many other areas as well, that we have been working on. And then we look at area of deficits within the country. Soya beans has a high level of deficit. Maize has a high level of deficit. What are we doing to even meet up with all those deficits before we start talking about export? I think that would be very essential for us to focus on. And in us doing that, I think one thing that probably we have not looked into deeply is the aging population of our farmers as well. I realize that emphasis has been laid around the smallholder farmers a lot, which statistically has shown that averagely they are around between the age of 65 to 75 years old. If this generation fade away, then what happens to our agricultural practices? And that is where, for us as a state, we are not just looking at now, we are being futuristic as well. So we are putting systems in place to ensure that when this generation leaves, this next generation of agribusiness people are being developed. And I won't go deeply into many of the programs that are getting this in place. But I think this is essential for us as a nation to focus on and be realistic with ourselves. What we do much more is that we wait for the time that the problem comes, that is exploding in our face, and we start running out of scatter. In addition to that as well, I think we need to start looking much more at a demand-driven approach to agricultural practices. And to me, that is one of the pain of agribusiness. What we have been doing is much more supply-driven. Do we even understand the total demand for a particular crop, beyond that crop, for that particular, if that particular product is processed? For example, let's say, what is the total demand for starch in Nigeria? And then we can then walk backward and start looking at what we need to produce to meet that particular demand. I'm not sure that's what we are currently doing as a country. Again, in terms of demand driven, you need to look at not just the quantity, but you need to look at the quality as well. What can we do to meet up with the standard, even domestic standard within our country? And then regional market is there before we start talking about international market. In addition to all of this, I think that we need to consider that there are structural problems with agribusiness or agricultural practices in general. And we need to look at all those structural problems and see how we can overcome each one of them holistically rather than in an isolated way. For example, issue of access is one that has been mentioned. Issue of risk is another one. There's aspect of infrastructure, there's aspect of policy, there's aspect of, I've mentioned the aging and smallholder farmers. And we have the issue of market as well, access to market, access to finance, and many other things like that. How can we holistically overcome or create a system to overcome all this? And like I mentioned earlier, this is one of the things that we are doing in our own state. So we have a strategy in place that has been put in place as a strategy document, as a strategy, for the state that overcome all these structural problems as being mentioned. If we do all these things, and not just to also look at the value chain alone, because we've been talking about value chain. Speaking about value chain, I mean, I had Manzo mentioning that the Soyo State will probably look at the issue of value chains. And of course, yes, that is essential. But beyond value chains, to me, and for us as a state, we also want to look at layers. Okay, so if I'm looking at maize, commodity value chain, I also want to look at the layers that exist within the maize commodity value chain. If I want to look at cassava, I want to look at layers that exist, meaning that I have to look at production, I have to look at the processing, I have to look at the agro-logistics, I have to look at the packaging, the standard requirement in terms of quality within the state as well. So this, to me, I think will be something that is very, very important. I think overall, I will mention that I think every state needs to go and develop a strategy around agribusiness. We've spoken about the federal level. Federal, as far as I'm concerned, their concentration and their focus should be on policy and resources generation or distribution for states. Much of production, much of processing are done in the states. Federal government don't own those lands. State owns them, local government owns them. So I think we should focus more on how we strengthen our state level or local government level to do what is needed to be done. And again, I think the issue of civil servants are mentioned. I must say that, yes, in my own experience, I can rightly say that it's not civil servants that are that bad. They are very, very progressive. And in reality, you need to really understand too well why they are who they are today and see what could be done to support them. We are doing that within the state, within our agency. I'm not saying it is all guru, but we can identify some that are very progressive and look at the areas or things that are not making them to do what they were supposed to do rightly. But in addition to that, we also have specialists on one side that are complementing what the civil servants don't have. And at the end of the day, we hope and we believe that this is going to strengthen the whole system as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nibo. Thank you for doing justice to, you've done a lot. Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing justice to the topic for today, for this session. I would also like to entertain our participants. I want them to also ask questions and then maybe five minutes for response before we before we draw the curtain to today's session. Mrs. Okpe, do we have any questions from our participant? Otherwise, I'll move on to ask Dibakundi and the rest of the panelists for their closing remark, and then also advise participant on how to probably go into collaboration and encourage them to also go into collaboration to enhance food production for economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Kumolu. Yes, we have some questions.
Okay.
The first is going to Dr. Dibakundi. It says, Dr. Debo, would Oyo State government be open to a PPP arrangement on tractor and equipment? Okay, can you all hear me, please?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Manzo, we can see you now.
Yeah, I just changed laptop, so I guess it was the other laptop.
Okay,
you're welcome back.
So, Dr. Akonde, please, would Oyo State government be open to a PPP arrangement on tractor and equipment leasing to farmers across the state with our company?
So as a state, we are open to all the private sector that have something meaningful to contribute to the state. I've seen this question and I've responded privately to the question. I've sent a contact number to this individual that I requested to get that sent this question. He or she can contact us for the Oyo State Agribusiness Development Agency, and we can, of course, we have processes and procedures for private sector to engage within the state regardless of how who they are. And then we can have such discussion. But the point is, yes, we are open to such, and I've sent our contact to this particular person privately that I requested to know that.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question goes to Mr. Inyang. It says last February when we were at the West Africa Agribusiness Show, Dr. Lola Masha was with us in February at the West Africa Agribusiness Show, the maiden edition. Babangona said that their program is only for the northern part of Nigeria. The poster wants to know if you have extended your programs to Southwest Nigeria because he has so much interest in them. Mr. Inyang, please.
Thank you for that question. So, just to put things in context, firstly, Babangona is not operating only in northern Nigeria. I think that's a very wrong perception. I would say we started in north. We started in Kaduna State. That's been our home state now, and we've expanded into 6 other states. We have plans to expand to other states in Nigeria because, our target is to work with 1 million smallholder farmers, and I'm sure that there are more, or there are thousands of farmers in other states. So I think over time, as we scale our business model and we increase the number of farmers that we work with, and also the number of crop varieties that our farmers cultivate, I'm sure we would be coming to a state near him soon, right? But definitely we have plans to expand across the nation, right?
All right, thank you very much, sir. We have another question for Dr. Akonde here. The poster would like to know, they would like you to visit Ibarakwa Central Local Government Area in Oyo State to rural farmers so they can know the areas you and government can partner with them.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you have some comments.
Yes, earlier I made mention that we have as one of our programs, the Oyo State Agribusiness Regional Development Programs, which is meant to develop the regions, the agrarian regions within the state. And one of the first programs that I mentioned we'll be doing is the farm rebuilding of the farm settlements to farm estates and the satellite farm estates as well. And Ibaraba region happens to be the first recipient of this through the tax support loan we got from the central bank. So yes, we will be doing that starting from Ibaraba, as we mentioned, precisely from Irua in Ibaraba. It will be our first farm estates within the state. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Those are the questions we'll be able to take for now. Mr. Komolu, you can continue, please.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys have done a lot of justice to some of the questions that I ask you. I would just like to hear one or two comments from you guys, and I want us to make it brief so that, because of time, so that our participant can also gain from you based on what you do. So over to Dr. Dibakundi. Dr. Dibakundi, I want you to give your closing remark around what our participants can do to assess you. Am I still online? Am I still here?
You are online, yes.
Okay. Okay, maybe, Doctor, just briefly give us your closing remark.
Thank you very much. My closing remark will be that government should make conscientious effort to create a business in farming. Quite a number of private entities are trying to do their best, but they can only do so much because of the limitation in terms of legislation, even finance, and to an extent also attitude of the public. We all know that the issues of land are very contentious globally, and until government comes in, we will not make meaningful progress. Currently, what people like Bobongona do is in situ clusterization. And that simply means that you zone in farms owned by farmers in their various locations. And that makes you travel over large tracts of land, if not kilometers, trying to provide services. And a lot of that is just wasted and makes your costs extremely high, making you uncompetitive. These are issues that I think going forward, we are going to try to resolve. The issue of skill gaps is there. I just finished a discussion with a Joboman. They want to start listing people with skill sets that can be employed by agricultural agribusiness companies. But in the discussion, it is clear that they don't even understand what the skill sets required by agricultural companies are. Of course, I talked to them about extension, and a few other things. This is something that we are looking at, and we are going to do a scoping to be able to come up with a framework on which to develop.
Wow, we lost Doctor again. Well, we lost Doctor again. Let's take Dr. Dibakundi's closing comment if we can have Dr. Manzo online.
Those skills before they are listed. On the issue of extension, I think it will be erroneous to expect that government.
Okay, Mr. Obon, can we have your closing comment? Because it seems we are losing Dr. Manzo, and we've lost him again. So can you please let Mr. Obon give his closing remark?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So, I mean, in closing, I think the most important things have been said, and I mean, for me, a private sector player that works closely with smallholder farmers, I think the important thing for the participants, one thing I would like them to take away is the fact that there are opportunities in agriculture, and there are opportunities for you to build viable businesses that can scale and can be profitable. While there is a need for the government to play an active role, in particularly when you want to talk about policy and legislation and licensing and permits and insurance and legal framework and all those other things. You as a business, is very important for you to understand the market, right? And so if you're going to build a successful agribusiness, you need to invest in your market assessment. You need to invest in your feasibility studies. You need to, and if you can, run through several development stages to test the viability of whatever model it is that you want to pursue, and to be sure that it will generate revenue. When you've done that and you've done your homework properly, then you can go about engaging government at some level to say, let's partner together to scale.
Thank you, Mr. Ubong. I really appreciate that, your closing remark. Let's take Dibakundi's closing remark, please. Dr. Dibakundi, your closing remarks, sir. Can the technical department please quickly resolve this, or?
I think it's a technical glitch, please, and I'm sure he's trying to reconnect. Dr. Maigari is still with us, please.
Okay, Dr. Maigari.
Yeah, well, I was talking about when the network conspired against me. However, like I said, these are things that we need to do. The next most important thing is standards. Standards are extremely important. What we see operating today is a situation where various regulatory agencies that are supposed to regulate standards in the agribusiness sector have actually become obstacles themselves. Today, I just had a meeting with a USAID agency. So what we are looking at is we are going to have a discussion with NINAT. We are going to have a discussion with Quarantine. We are going to have a discussion with Standards Organizations of Nigeria, and so that we can align all the frameworks for enforcing standards in agricultural commodities and products. What I'm going to tell participants here who are yearning for agribusiness is to tell you that the easiest way to make it is to come together in form of cooperatives, especially when you do not have access to funds or land. When you come together as a cooperative, you share risk. And when you share that risk, you can start small. Start small, start doing something, and then you can approach the government. Nigeria remains the largest market in Africa, 200 million people. So many mouths to feed. In ECOWAS, the whole of ECOWAS, we have 400 million people to feed. So this potential alone is so huge that nobody will be stranded if you use agribusiness with all the seriousness that it deserves. However, I must warn. However, okay, let me just close. However, I must also warn that, like I said, we have taken time to say all the factors that are militating against that. But there is even a bigger problem that is coming. The African Free Continental Trade Area agreement that we have just signed, which should have commenced July, but for COVID, opens up.
We lost Dr. Manzo. Well, can we have Dr. Dibakundi's closing remark in 2 minutes, please? Thank you.
Dr. Akonde is yet to join us back, sir.
Okay.
We're having quite a lot of technical glitch this afternoon.
Another market
to be
of 1 point.
Okay, anyway, let me draw the curtain here. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our panelists and also to thank our participants. I want to thank everybody that made this session a wonderful one today. I love the contributions from everywhere, from the panelists and also the contribution of our participants. So I would like to hand over to Okpe Ladipo for our closing remark. Thank you, and I hope I will be able to have some other time on this topic because I know we have a lot of questions, and I also have a lot of questions for our participants. And I hope in the future, maybe maybe based on popular demand, we'll still bring back this topic and bring back this back our participant to our panelists to do justice to it again. Thank you so much. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumolu. I'm so sorry, my video is having hitches. That's why I'm able to come up as well. And please, would like to apologize to all our participants for today. We had quite some technical glitches. Hopefully, we hope for better network, and of course, would continue to work on better network in Nigeria. We all understand how the network is, and of course, having webinars now, this is one of the outcomes of COVID. So we're hoping that with time, we, of course, will get better and would have better infrastructural facilities. Thank you once again to all our participants, especially our expert panelists and our moderator. It was a well-moderated session. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your contributions. Mr. Inyang, thank you so much. Dr. Akonde, thank you so much. Dr. Maigari, thank you so much for joining us once again. And to all our participants, I trust that we've all had an insightful session for today, and hopefully we expect that you join us for our November edition of the September Top Personality of the Month interviews and webinars as well. Thank you once again for joining us. Please continue to follow us on our social media handles, WAAS_exhibition, Twitter and Instagram. On YouTube, we are WAS Show Exhibition. That's WAASHOW. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Yang. Thank you, Mr. Kumolu.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Oh. Okay. How was it? Oh, right, Wale. A lot of people don't know right, Wale, man. I'm walking in Zoom, yeah.
Why are you calling him?